have been listening to live Supreme Court arguments over the authority to impose tariffs, whether President Trump has that, to impose sweeping tariffs without Congress's approval. Now, what he has been using is a national emergency law to do so. It's the linchpin of his economic agenda, these tariffs. Now, based on what we've heard, the outlook doesn't seem to be all that great for the president, who earlier this morning called these arguments and the forthcoming decision that they will make in the Supreme Court life or death. We're going to talk about what we've heard so far with an incredible panel here. Steve Vladeck, I want to start with you. What is your take on this? And again, I know we're kind of in the weeds on tariffs, but I just want to remind our viewers that this is about so much more. This is about presidential power and whether Donald Trump has as much as he thinks he does.
Dan, it's such an important moment for the court and the country. We've had so many rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court in Trump cases over the last 9 months, but they've all been in this frenetic context of fast-moving emergency applications, of quick-hitting, what should the rules be for weeks, for months. This is the first case to get to the court on the permanent question of whether President Trump can do the thing he's doing. And it's a case about how broadly the executive is allowed to interpret a statute that doesn't use the word tariffs, that refers to a national emergency that was enacted in a context of reining in presidential power after Watergate. It's why this is such a big deal. It has massive political implications because of how central tariffs are to Trump's foreign policy agenda, but it also has massive, what the lawyers would call doctrinal implications, because it's such a signal of where this court is likely to go in the other cases that are already on their way to the court.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And Laura, the signals that we've gotten based on the questions from the justices seem pretty loud and not great for President Trump.
Out of the gate, they were peppering them with questions. They were peppering the argument that suggests that he had this power to do so, and here's why. Just about a year or so ago, the court was saying they had a major questions doctrine that they were saying. Essentially, hold on, if it's got huge political or economic significance, you got to go through Congress because we got these different branches of government that are all co-equal. What Trump is essentially saying is, I have an emergency. It's called a trade deficit. And as a result of that, I need to take action that makes me go around Congress. Well, the other side saying, that's not the emergency. You still got to go through Congress to do so. That's why you're hearing things about delegation. Has Congress given the power of the purse and taxation and leveraging tariffs back to you in some way? They're saying no. And there was a really interesting one by Gorsuch today where he essentially was challenging politically the idea, well, hold on, they can give the power back when they think it's no longer an emergency. And he was essentially saying, in what world does Congress cede power and then get to reclaim it when you've got elections that are happening?
And when you have a veto. I mean, when
you got a veto,
and so you'll need 2/3 supermajorities of both chambers of Congress. What can 2/3 of both chambers agree to right now, other than that maybe today is Wednesday?
Nothing.
Oh, is there a shutdown?
And then the question is whether that's relevant to what the framers intended.
Atmospherically, this is what I found most striking about the arguments, which is you don't usually hear the justices, especially Republican appointees like Neil Gorsuch, bring in the political reality. They want to decide these questions in a world in which institutions are idealized and are acting the way they're supposed to. That Justice Gorsuch, who is a vote the administration definitely needs, is actually focused on the real world consequences of how hard it would be to unwind power that the president created in the statutes. That is a very telling sign and not a good one for President Trump.
Yeah, it's about their credibility too, by the way, because if they go against that theory, then that undermines their own precedent from a year ago.
Right.
So if it's good for Biden to have the restrictions for the student loans and beyond, suddenly it's okay for Trump to do an end run, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, okay. So let's drill down on tariffs specifically. And I mean, we've talked about this nonstop, that this is so ingrained in who Donald Trump is and what he wants, and has been since decades before he ran for office. Just one example. Listen to what he said to Oprah Winfrey in 1988.
I'd make our allies, forgetting about the enemies you can't talk to so easily, I'd make our allies pay their fair share. We're a debtor nation. I think people are tired of seeing the United States ripped off. And I can't promise you everything, but I can tell you one thing, this country would make one hell of a lot of money from those people that for 25 years have taken advantage.
It's amazing to listen to him in that younger context and just his voice. But you are right. It is central to his political identity, and that was before he was really in politics. But it is central to his worldview. What he just said at the end there, though, just to get to the practical impacts that Amy Coney Barrett was getting at, another vote I would imagine they would probably need. The whole get rich, this country could get rich. Well, if this doesn't go their way, and asking the questions about how you pay back, and she's called this whole thing a mess. I mean, you don't hear a Supreme Court justice usually, I think, just like use the common language of that, but a mess. And I think, to Steve's point about the political fallout of this, Donald Trump has raised the stakes politically on this. He has called this the most important Supreme Court case of all time.
Life or death.
It is what he ran on. It is his worldview. And he has said this will determine whether or not the country has the future that he envisions.
And Dana, can I just tell you, I mean, last night as we were covering the election, I was talking to Republicans who are honestly, privately praying that the Supreme Court rejects Donald Trump's argument here, right? I mean, they think that if the court decides against him, it will unleash the economy and that maybe they'll have a better chance or any chance of hanging on to the House in the midterm election.
Because economic suffering that voters made their voices heard on last night isn't just about sort of affordability and in the groceries, but that it is about that, but that there's also a connection to people hurting because of the tariffs that he's imposed.
Right, and the idea that there's a lot of uncertainty right now, a lot of volatility, and I mean the stock market is going gangbusters. There's a sense there might be a bubble there. Jobs is really the biggest one, right? Our companies feeling like they're in a position to be hiring. We've just seen, obviously, AI is also disrupting that piece of it. So there is this kind of behind the scenes tension where these Republicans are just hoping beyond hope that the court fixes the political problem that they feel the president is creating, but they can't say that out loud.
These kind of Republicans that have never been on board with these kinds of tariffs.
No,
And that's why it's powerful again, by
and
the
that's
way.
why he didn't do it the
Well, and some
first time around.
and some of whom might be justices on the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, let's keep in mind that like those political views are not limited to the political branches.
Carrie, I want to bring you in, and I want to take this up many thousands of feet, because we're talking about tariffs because it has a real world impact. But this discussion about how much power any president has, especially this president who has been so aggressive in trying to gobble up as much power as he could, this is just the first, or one of many, I should say, cases that the Supreme Court is going to hear. Also, control of independent agencies, firing a member of the Federal Reserve, ending birthright citizenship, withholding funds appropriated by Congress, the transgender military service ban, National Guard deployments. All of this is President Trump saying, I have the power to do this, and coming up through the courts are questions for the Supreme Court to answer yes or no whether he's right.
Right, and this particular case, while it is about tariffs, it also really is about the president's emergency powers. He's using this statute, IEPA, to designate emergencies and then to be able to levy the tariffs, which is his signature foreign policy tool. If the Supreme Court takes this particular tool away from him, which he uses extensively in his diplomacy, in his economic conversations with foreign partners and foreign adversaries, he uses tariffs as his signature foreign policy tool. If they take it away, what is he going to do in the second half of his term? What leverage will he have? As to his emergency powers, that is one of the significant things that I wonder whether the court will really take that on, get into whether or not the particular things that he's designated as an emergency are emergencies. I don't think they will. I think they're going to focus more on the statutory interpretation and whether or not the text of this statute allows him to levy a tariff, which the government is saying it's a tariff, whereas the businesses are saying it's a tax.
Can I say, though, I mean, to Carrie's point about like what is poor President Trump to do? I mean, it's worth stressing there are other statutes that authorize the imposition of tariffs. I mean, one of the, I think, most compelling arguments that have been made by the small businesses challenging the tariffs, and as we're sitting here by the Solicitor General of Oregon, is that it's not like Congress has given the president no power to impose tariffs. It's that there are other statutes that have more rigorous substantive constraints, more rigorous procedural constraints. And were the Supreme Court to say, you can use IEPA, this emergency statute, based solely on your determination that there is some situation of, severe, extraordinary harm, not only does that render those other statutes irrelevant, but it also, I think, would be an ominous harbinger of how the court's going to approach those other statutes in other cases.
Well, and one of the difficulties with the emergencies is that Congress really hasn't legislated in a stronger way a mechanism to end emergencies. And so there is this situation, this came up a little bit earlier in the oral arguments, that emergencies just continue to go on without being ended.
I think you could just end the sentence, Congress hasn't legislated a way to, period. Because you can fill in the blank with pretty much anything.
But it comes back, if I may, really quickly.
Yeah.
But one of the striking things here is that there was a provision in the National Emergencies Act when Congress enacted in 1976 that would have allowed Congress to terminate a national emergency through what's just called a concurrent resolution, through a resolution that had a majority in both chambers. That's a legislative veto that the Supreme Court struck down in 1983. So the Supreme Court bears, I think, some responsibility, right, for some of the mess in which we're finding ourselves.